We saw last time, we started with Israel's vulnerable borders. Those were the partition borders, if you recall. Burn that into your memory as I proceed in my remarks tonight. And the day or the night Israel was founded, Israel, as we saw, officially, the British mandate ended at midnight on Friday night. Because of Shabbos considerations, they proclaimed the state, as we saw last week, Friday afternoon. But at midnight, the Arab armies entered Palestine. Let's put it that way. It's a more detailed map, and gotta get used to this. But you can kind of see, here's the Jordanian army and how they did it. Here's the Iraqi army. This is not correct, it's the Iraqi army that way. The Egyptian army will come up this way, as we'll talk about in a second. And the Syrians and the Lebanese, as you see thus. You won't have to know a huge amount of military stuff tonight, but you'll have to know some, I'm sorry to say. How would you like to have been in charge of the Israeli effort at that time? This guy was 32 years old, Yigal Yadin, and like all these fellows in the Israeli defenses in 48, this is going to be a very hot political issue with Ben-Gurion and the others. The amateurs, in the sense nobody went to military school. They were the top people in the army, had no military experience. They did not. I repeat, they did not serve in World War II. There were some Israeli officers served in World War II. Many of them were the mediocre ones. It's kind of funny. Just because you have formal training does not automatically mean you're going to be a great commander. Ultimately, it has to do with logistics, understanding of ground, firepower, the sorts of things that are very technical but are on the ground realities. Now, how would you like to be him? Yigal Yadin had the job of managing very scant resources in order to meet this attack on a variety of fronts. The Israelis at this time did not have a lot of men. They were expecting, and as I told you last week, they're going to get a lot of men, and they're going to get a fair amount of ammunition and equipment, but that takes time. And right now in May, you don't have time. That's the point. Right now in May, you don't have time. And because of this, it's back to the wall. It's ein breira. And the result is that, let's put it this way, everybody's called up. They draft whoever they can, and people of all types are drafted, as you see over here. These are taken from May of 48. Now, don't worry, they're not in the same unit, but we don't have that problem that we have now. But all kidding aside, in 48, they put the Frum Hasidic types in one a group, and the Haganah and the Palmach girls and boys in another group. They didn't have time for that sort of thing, and they didn't have time for the smirks. Everybody was needed because the Arabs are coming. And I can guarantee you, I don't know these people, but from these photographs, half of them are dead by the time the fighting's over. It's just, it is what it is. And because he had so many scant proposals, scant resources, so this is the reason why, in my opinion, mistakenly, big mistake, that's why he has to turn down the very interesting proposal of Israel's best commander, best general, the person who emerges in the 48 war without question as Israel's best commander, Yigal Allon, the head of the Palmach, also no actual military experience, in formal armies, all the rest of it, just had it naturally. And he had this daring idea, which it's easy for me to say because we're standing at 60 years later, but nevertheless I think it's true, and that is go right down the middle of Israel. Go to what they call the triangle is. You'll see all these places in the map soon. And if you take this town, and that town, then the Arab position crumbles automatically. And don't spend all your time trying to defend this position, that position, but take an overall strategy in which even if you yield here and there, since you're going to conquer the important areas, everything else will fall memela, as they say. But Yadin said, it's a great idea. We cannot strip Tel Aviv from its men. We cannot strip Jerusalem from it. I just don't feel willing to take that kind of risk. It might work, but it might not, and therefore we're not going to do it. And that's the reason, my friends, unfortunately, that Israel will end up with these lousy borders by the time the 48-49 war is over. But such is history. Ben-Gurion says and knows, he writes this in his diary. He says, if we can hold out for 2 months, we're okay. The question is if. Right? But if we can hold out for a while, then we'll get significant reinforcements. As I said before, people start coming in. Let me tell you something. Before it's over, 20,000 Jews from overseas, Machal, people will come to join the Israeli army. It's interesting. From America, from the British Commonwealth, and places like this, 20,000 is a lot in this kind of a war. They'll also get ammunition from Czechoslovakia, eventually, cannon and heavy bullets and airplanes and things like this. But everything takes a while. So can they hold out? In May, these things are not happening. So can they hold out? Last week, I did a piece of it, which was the Yerushalayim front. The Arab Legion moved in right away, as you saw, I think, before. Over here, right? And they crossed at midnight over here on May 14th, May 15th, and they immediately took up positions over here to do, here's the small triangle, what they call it, which is Ramla and Lud and Ramallah. We all know where this is in Yerushalayim. If you have relatives, as I do, in Ramot, then Ramot is just facing Ramallah, it's on the northern side. And I tried to explain last time how it was that although nobody had an exact plan, it turns out fighting over Yerushalayim, and the Jews do not win, really. They hold on to the new city, which is, of course, of extreme importance, but they certainly do not take over the old. But there was a lot of other stuff going on at that time. I just didn't have time last week to explain it. So we have to hold cup, as they say, and understand that the Israelis are fighting on several fronts simultaneously. First, I'm going to address the Egyptian army coming in the south. Egypt is the largest Arab country. It's got the biggest army. It's got the most resources if it knows how to use it. Thank God they did not know how to use it in 1948 at all. And here's King Farouk, and here's his prime minister, Nakhrashi Pasha, who will be shot before too long. And these are two very irresponsible national leaders, and thank God. And the reason I say that is because all throughout 47 and early 48, they were, should we get involved in the Palestine issue? They couldn't make up their minds. And because they couldn't make up their minds, they took no efforts to strengthen the army and organize it. Now, if they were really on the ball, which they weren't, thank God, if they were really on the ball, they'd say, we're going to consider our options, but meanwhile, let's work in a worst case scenario and get the army ready just in case. You remember, many of us remember in Entebbe how they weren't sure if they're going to go or not, but they said, you have to get them in the plane and in the air, so by Saturday night, if the answer is yes, we're already ready to go. They did not do this in Egypt. They let the military supply situation and the army training and recruitment and all that sort of thing just go hefkerdik, and the result was that Egypt has no plan, no organization, they have no food for the soldiers, very, very little ammunition, and therefore, most of the Egyptian decision makers in the defense ministry and the general staff and places like that say, we're not really going in. We're going to watch. The Jews and the Palestinians, whoever, will fight it out, and Egypt won't go in. At the most, what they'll do, and this is something that's very practical today, I'm sorry to say, at the most is the Muslim Brotherhood, which was around at that time. It was started in Egypt in the 1920s, as we'll see, and by definition, these are the more vigorous and fanatic of the types, and they wanted to go serve as volunteers to fight the Jews in Palestine. Let them go. Let a steady stream of volunteer fighters without any particular military organization go and fight the Jews. But the Egyptian army will stay out of it. At the last minute, they changed their minds, like on May 12th or something like this. King Farouk, who really hated the Zionists. I mean, let me put it this way. There was a large Jewish community of 70,000 in Egypt during his time, and they were not bothered at all, not at all. I can tell you, if you want to hear something funny, the chief rabbi of Egypt in Cairo at that particular time in 1948, not the chief rabbi, but the Al Bezin in Cairo, Avad Yosef, right? A young guy, just as his first stellar, as they say. This is true. As the Sephardic community in Egypt, and King Farouk says to him, says, "Are you praying that we should win?" He says, "Oh, definitely." Is what it is. And there's no plan, as they say before. So, day before, they say, we're going in. And the army goes into a panic. The generals, they say, we weren't given any time and equipment and planning. And we have no food, or, the soldiers don't have shoes and things like this. We're going in anyway. And so, in this very irresponsible fashion, they say, go attack the Jews, go invade Israel. Remember, The night Israel was proclaimed, the Egyptian Air Force bombed Tel Aviv, killed a bunch of civilians, and they repeatedly bombed them as long as they could over the next several weeks. So do not forget this. But they didn't have any real plan, as they say before, to do it. And just bombing for the heck of it, while maybe satisfying if you're bloodthirsty, doesn't really get you anywhere in a military sort of sense. And so, what do? The general plan then becomes like this. Let's take over the Gaza Strip, because that's the part nearest to Egypt. And so the Egyptian army sets out. They cross the top of the Sinai Peninsula. You all know what I'm talking about. And they go right into Gaza, because there are no Jews there, or hardly. There's one kibbutz, as we'll see in a minute. But the rest of it is all Arab territory. And at least we'll be saving the Palestinians from the advance of the Jews, which we saw was a reality during April and May of 48. And so we'll come in as liberators. But once you take over the Gaza Strip, what's your next step? Are you going to advance to Tel Aviv? Now, you and I know, I look at this audience, I think everybody knows, Tel Aviv is not far from Gaza at all, correct? You just drive up a little north, next thing you know, you're in Ashkelon, and then Ashdod, and then Tel Aviv, and then here you are. So are they really going to go into Tel Aviv with an army that's not fully ready for it and all the rest of it? Here again, you can say Hallel, because the Egyptian generals who are in charge weren't of the right, shall we say, imagination. What they really should have done is a General Patton, a General Sherman, which is to hell with everything, literally, and go straight ahead and reach your objective, and don't let anything get in your way. And if anybody attacks you on the flanks, just keep going. And that would have been devastatingly effective. They did not do that at all. They're afraid if we go too close to Tel Aviv, we might get trapped by the Jews. And so, as you see over here, I'm trying to portray a situation in which the basic Egyptian problem is that they were unprepared in all kind of different ways. They have unimaginative generalship. There's no advanced training to psych up the soldiers to get them ready. Does any of us remember this guy, Nasser, who came later on the president of Egypt? He was a major in the Egyptian army. He writes in his memoirs very bitterly about the fact that they're given very few bullets. He has to go, when they go into Gaza, this is famous, he goes into Gaza as its head of the Egyptian unit. He says, I had to go to the marketplace and buy olives and cheese for my soldiers because they had no food. Right? Like, what kind of a way of this is to do war? Now, the Egyptians themselves, later on, as July, August, September, October, will get their military act together. So like the Jews, once again, the mirror image, both sides are unprepared in May and June, but they'll get more prepared as the year goes on. The basic problem that the Egyptians will face from a military point of view is a very interesting one, and it's this, okay? What you're seeing over here is Yudalf HaNekudot B'Negev, Motzei Yom Kippur, 1946. What that means is that Israel, the Zionists, late in the day, literally at the end of 46, just before the UN vote, wake up and they say, gee, we got no Jewish settlements whatsoever in the Negev. And when I say the Negev, I don't mean the southern Negev either. You see where I'm talking about, the northern Negev, right? I mean, the north of the Gaza Strip, the places that you and I are familiar with, like Sderot and places like that. There's no Jewish thing whatsoever. The main Jewish areas that they purchased and built settlements on were in the coastline and in the north and places like that. And so, how are we going to be able to tell the United Nations, how are we going to tell Truman, give us a Negev or anything like this? We ain't got no Jews there, which is true. He's going to say an all-Arab territory, which is true. So we have to change that reality. So it's very late in the day, I would say at the 11th hour, and they plan an operation in which they set up 11 settlements. That's the 11 points in the Negev, Yud Alf Nekudot B'Negev, and they just get people in trucks, you know how they used to do it, and look what you're talking about over here. Nirim, Urim, Be'eri, Kfar Daro. Look at this. This is a kibbutz in the middle of the Gaza Strip. You notice that? They have in 46 a kibbutz right. I mean, these guys are tough. And later on, what do you call it? Kedma and so forth. So there is now, very late in the day, a Jewish presence and Jewish, strong points in the Negev. Because let me ask you a question. What is this all about? Are these guys here to grow cucumbers in the sand? They're there to be a military outpost. It's the kibbutz in the sense that it's really calling itself a farm, but it's in preparation for a war. And that is what happened. And so, this being the case, these kibbutzim and moshavim, which are brand new, and are civilian in the sense that they're not soldiers in the army, there is no army, as men and women and children. They are, for better or worse, the Jewish defense line against the Egyptian invasion. Now, if the Egyptians were smart, as I told you the other day, they do like I'm doing right here. You go right up here and then straight up to Tel Aviv and leave all these things aside. Because if you destroy or capture Tel Aviv, all this becomes batal anyway. Isn't that right? So if you go for the main thing, that's not how they did it. The Egyptian generals were scared and they said, first we have to do this, then we have to do this. Oh, this might attack us in the flank, and this and this and this. And only then, when we're totally secure, do we move another 30 miles and then make sure we have this all straight, and then we move north until we did. Very orthodox, unimaginative, old-fashioned military kind of strategy, playing it safe, which is, of course, the wrong thing to do. And as I say before, history is full of famous generals who had, let's put it this way, when General Sherman marches through Georgia to go to Atlanta and then to the sea, there are all these Confederate armies in his rear, and he says, let them go wherever they want. I'll even give them provisions. Let them do it. I'm going my way. Because I'm intending to get to the sea, to Savannah, and then we'll win the war. So this is what the Egyptians should have done, as they say before. Remember that Egypt was terror bombing the Tel Aviv. That's what they were doing. They were killing civilians. If they would have a big and efficient air force, I want you to understand this, they would carpet bomb Tel Aviv. I mean, do understand that when they talk about these atrocities and those atrocities, they were prepared to do what they could to flatten Tel Aviv. They just didn't have the air force to do it. And Israel got a big break 1 week after the invasion when the Egyptians will, by accident, bomb what they think is an Israeli airfield. Turns out to be a British one, the RAF. The RAF gets so angry, they send up a bunch of planes, they shoot down a bunch of Egyptian airplanes and bomb the Egyptian thing to teach them a lesson. Believe me, the British were not doing it to help Israel, but that's what happened anyway. So, all kind of strange things are in there. Now, as a result of what I'm saying, although I can't give details, there will be a bunch of sieges and assaults on individual kibbutzim and moshavim because the Egyptians feel they can't go ahead unless they secure that particular type of area. And the kibbutzim are scared to death. But the Negev settlements that I'm talking about over here, and it's the northern Negev, as you see, will become the sites of major heroic resistance. A lot of people will get killed. And you can go and visit some of these places today we have. And some of them, I remember Kibbutz Negba, others still preserve the bombed up and shot up areas in the kibbutz. And they see this is how far the Egyptians got. And sometimes the Egyptians overran the whole place. There's some of them that they were eventually, the defenders were either killed or forced out. And they did take it over, but they bought time. So these were the Karbonos who bought the time for the Jews. They're scared to death that they shouldn't do to them like happened in the Etzion block. I think we talked about last week that the Arab Legion captured the Etzion, today what we call Gush Etzion. And although the Arab Legion didn't shoot the Jewish POWs, but the other Arab auxiliaries in the area did. It was a massacre. And so they're all afraid of that. They're not wrong to be afraid of that. First of all, I don't know what the Egyptian army's like. They weren't particularly civilized. But the auxiliaries in the Egyptian army is the Muslim Brotherhood. So you know what they're going to do to anybody, men, women, and children, that they're going to capture over here. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded by this guy who's Egyptian, who is living at this time, Hassan al-Banna, and he will have fights with the Egyptian government over their misconduct of the war in Palestine. As a result, he'll have Nokrashi Pasha, after the war is over, he'll have him bumped off, and then King Farouk will have him bumped off. Okay? I got no problem with that. I'm just saying that's what happened. And the Muslim Brotherhood has been in the area I just described, operating here already in late 47 and 48, when we were talking 3 weeks ago, whatever, about the fighting between the Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, plus the other volunteers that move in who are Muslims who are coming in to fight the Jews. A big portion of them are the Muslim Brotherhood. So the kibbutzim in this area have a very tough time in 1948. Now, the main one is, as you can see over here, you got to go through Kfar Darom. Isn't that right? That's number one. And number two, here, Nirim. If you understand, this is the axis of advance. So those who know what I'm talking about will understand that if you don't take these places out, they can shoot at you as you go by. And they were worried about it, and they viewed it as bones in their throat, even though they should not have, but that's what happened. And therefore, during the week after May 15th, May 16th, May 17th, that week or two, is major attacks by the Egyptian army on both of these settlements. In Kibbutz Nirim, for example, it's their finest hour, so to speak. So 45 Jews hold back 1,000 Egyptians. It happened. The same basic scenario, Kfar Darom, and the Egyptians then do the following. They are not able to capture the place, but they say we won, and then they go weiter. You understand? In other words, they hold a victory celebration, and then they say we captured it, and then they move ahead. In other words, they lie, which is very good for the Jews. And the result is that they could have just bypassed it in the first place, but it didn't happen. This is a tremendous boost for the Israeli morale, for the Jewish morale, and a tremendous blow to the Egyptian morale. Because if an army can't take a place held by 40, 50 people, including men, women, then what's going on? Obviously there's something wrong in the situation. But as I say before, they move north. The Egyptians proceed on the way to Tel Aviv. They're getting closer as they move north. They don't capture Kfar Darom. Now I'll tell you right now, they invest it, and it will be surrounded and attacked by the Egyptians continually for several months, and eventually the Jews will have to evacuate, which means that the Jews will have no hold whatsoever in the Gaza Strip, which is why when Israel recaptures the Gaza Strip in the 1967 war, and there's all this push to make settlements, as we all know from the Hitnat Kut, in this area, the Gush Katif and all the rest of it, one of the first things they do is they resettle Kfar Darom, because they say this was ours and we lost it in the 48 war, now we want to get it back. Unfortunately, as we know, they lost it again. So geography, static defense versus mobile defense, all these play a very important role in these little episodes which threaten Tel Aviv. Then they move north it is, and up here you run into Kibbutz Yad Mordechai. This cannot be bypassed because it's on top of a road looking down. So they have to take this place, and they say they're going to do it. They bring up the cannon and everything in order to storm the place. Now here they have a tough time, because Kibbutz Yad Mordechai, mostly ex-partisans. These are Jews who fought in the Eastern Europe against the Nazis. Tough is not the word, okay? And they just went through the Holocaust, so they've been gone over by experts. It's not the Egyptian army going to scare them. The Seine wird mit Hängen, will ich starben mit Gesängen. This is the famous partisan song. Even if the enemy hangs me, I will die with a song on the lips. I'll kill you as I go down over here. And so the Egyptians have a tough time. Ben Gurion says you have to hold out to the last man. But of course, even though they always make these statements, they do evacuate the children. This is a scene that is repeated throughout Palestine and Israel all through 1948. We will all hold, everyone's staying, but in the end, in reality, it's a Jewish day, so the kids go, and sometimes the women go, and sometimes in some of these kibbutzim, what they do is they say, we'll take a vote. We don't want both parents get killed, so which parent is more important? They do like that, and they say, this one the father should go, and here the mother should go. You have these kind of scenes over there, and then the battle rages in Yad Mordechai in May. Over here, I'll give you a very brief description because I think it merits it. You'll hear over here, the Egyptians attacked right after dawn on 19th May, so that's 5 days after Israel became a state, when fighters and batteries, it was airplanes, and batteries of 25-pounders and mortars pounded the settlements. So first they bombed the place. But the 1st Battalion's assault, supported by a company just afternoon, was driven back after initially breaching the perimeter fence. And so you know what that means. They break in and they're forced back. The Egyptians suffered dozens of dead. The kibbutz lost 5 dead. Cairo radio immediately announced that the settlement had fallen. The next morning, on the 20th May, the assault was resumed by the Egyptian 7th Battalion, supported by 2 armored cars and desperate hand-to-hand fighting along the perimeter. With much of the kibbutz on fire behind them, the defenders beat back 7 assaults. I notice he's fighting sometimes with bare hands. It's tough. 13 more Israelis died, 20 were killed, dozens of Egyptians died. That night, the Palmach sent in some reinforcements. The next day, the Egyptians spent licking their wounds and shelling the kibbutz. They prevented a relief column from reaching the place. The settlement's buildings are leveled. The defenders become inhabitants of caves and tunnels. Notice they bombed to bits every building in the place. And on 22nd May, with dozens of wounded, defenders are pleading for permission to withdraw. The Jews say, we can't hold out. They radio headquarters, we fear another Kfar Etzion. Let us get out of here. Right? Allow us to evacuate or send help. And they write back, and a few hours later, no water, and we're exhausted. And they said, we're going to leave if you don't give us permission, because we have no strength left to defend the settlement. The Egyptians were determined to take Yad Mordechai. They added another battalion with artillery and tanks that hitched the kibbutz through 23rd May, just before sunset. the battalion, the Egyptians mounted a joint assault, preceded by a destructive boom of fire and shells. 4 waves of infantry tried, and 4 waves fell back as they left behind them a trail of blood. They had tanks and artillery and aircraft, but we, the Jews, only had a few hand grenades and machine guns. We pressed our human advantage because we had what to fight for. He talks about Auschwitz and all this sort of thing. By nightfall, all the defenders were dead or wounded. Under cover of darkness, the Palmach Brigade sent a company in to extricate the wounded. The Egyptians find the column, the relief column, and shoot it up, and it didn't work. And at the end is whoever can get out gets out. Some people were bayoneted and all this sort of thing. By morning, the kibbutz and the palmachs had escaped and reached enemy territory without the Egyptians realizing. Next morning, the Egyptians launched a huge assault, and of course, nobody's there. So they say, we won. Now, they did win, but the point is like this. It took them 5-6 days. It's like the Alamo, right? It's repeated fighting. And look at they fought with hand-to-hand. If you go, I've been there, if you go to Yom Kippur, they still have the field, and you see all the dummies set up there to represent where the Egyptians were and where the others were. It was a tough business. Now, the immediate victory is with the Egyptians, of course, because they captured a place. But the larger victory is actually with the defenders of Mordechai, because they spooked the Egyptian generals. You understand? War at the end of the day is a mind game. Not all, but very important part of it is a mind game. And so the Egyptians say, I guess, the Jews are tough. This is going to be a hard one to do. And we need more reinforcements. And, you have that kind of approach. And the result is that they don't move ahead the way they ought to, which is to go north and try to take Tel Aviv. They get as far north as Ashdod. You and I know that Ashdod is 20 miles away, 20 miles south of Tel Aviv. I can tell you right now, it was a real risk. The Jews were scared out of their mind. They didn't know what you and I know, which is the Egyptians were poorly led and incompetent, didn't have weapons, they see the mighty Egyptian army coming in. There's what they call the fog of war, what I imagine you're like. And they're so desperate, they actually sent 2 Israeli spies, to go to Gaza and poison the water, like the Mufti wanted to do, to poison the water supply in Tel Aviv, and then play germ warfare, because they figure we have to do something to spread death among the enemy. The 2 spies are caught and hanged. This is the desperate feeling that the Jews are having. But in the end, you and I know that the Egyptians never really decided to push farther north than this, not during this period. Ezer Weitzman, remember him from the Air Force? This way became famous. He had Israel like one plane that he bombed them a whole lot. When the Messerschmitts, he freaked them out. They also had a Palmach unit running around all over the place here. Let me explain. This was a combination. This is a smart thing what I'm about to say. The Jews had a combination of a static and a mobile defense. And so the static defense are these places here. Kfar Darom, Nirim, the actual place the Egyptians have to conquer if they want to proceed ahead of it. In addition, they had like the desert rats. They had these Palmach units riding around on jeeps with machine guns and things like this, the way they used to have in Rommel's time in the desert, and Colonel Sterling, hit and run raids. And the 2 of these were fairly effective. And the result is that they, go and shoot a bunch of Egyptians and drive away, and go and shoot a bunch of things and drive away. When you're hit like this and you're bombed here, you don't realize that it's a tiny force. Just like the Jews vastly overestimated the power of the Egyptians, vice versa. The Egyptians say, oh my God, they're going to have a bunch of gigantically held fortresses like Yad Mordechai, which was a very small garrison actually. The Jews have a huge air force. They're bombing us, even though it was like 1 or 2 planes. And they have these massive, raiding forces for enfilade fire, and really it was a few tanks. Not even that, a few jeeps, and armored up a little bit. And the bottom line is that when the Jews do launch a counterattack at Ashdod to try to drive the Egyptians back, they are not successful because the Egyptians are good soldiers. And it's not well led. There's a difference. The Egyptians, in all the wars that Israel had, man to man, were very good soldiers, and they're famous for this. They've been very steady in adversity and in defense and things like this. But you have to have a good general. You have to have your own Rommel or something like this in order to handle them right. Thank God they've never had that. And so what happens is that when the Jews attack them at Ashdod, the Egyptians do beat them back, but they say, oh my God, this was a really tough battle. Who knows how many other human waves they're going to have behind them. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so the Egyptians are so spooked and terrified of their exposed positions and long lines of supplies that they say, we better dig in and fortify our lines of supply and make sure that we have a long line of soldiers defending this whole area over here. They shouldn't be able to attack us, and that we should maintain our supply link with Egypt. Well, all this is great, but what it means is they're not attacking Tel Aviv. That's the bottom line. They're not going to go that far, and as a result, their generalship prevented them from doing serious damage to Israel because they had the ability. I'm sure they kicked themselves today. They could have taken down Tel Aviv if they wanted to, and that would have been the end of Israel, period. Because everything revolved around Tel Aviv. Maybe you understand that, maybe you don't. But that's what it would involve. So did the Jews fight well? Did the Egyptians fight well? As I told you last week, it's two drunks banging into each other. There's a lot of that you find in the 48 war, because Israel is a brand new country and didn't have time to get its military act organized, and the Arabs, through their own criminal negligence, were in the same position. They were not brand new countries. They could have gotten themselves organized, but they did not do so. But remember, Kfar Darom is invested and will eventually fall. Now, I'm not going to go into this kind of detail on all the other fronts, but on the other hand, I will say, basically, that what happens is the following. Let's see here. Okay. The main problem, of course, was here and here and here. You can sort of tell how the maps work. And they write the Saudi army. It's a mistake. This is the Iraqi army. Iraq sent a large army, by the standards of that time, 10,000 men. And they're supposed to coordinate with the Jordanians. Let me put it this way. King Abdullah is the king of Transjordan. His cousin is the king of Morocco, of Iraq. It was a Hashemite dynasty at that time. So they did cooperate, as they have done actually later as well. So the Jordanian army takes over this area. The Iraqi army said, let's take over this area. Here is very tragic. And the reason I say this is because the Iraqis, once again, were to find themselves in a situation where they come across certain kibbutzim and Samach and other places, and they fight back very hard. And you have a repeat of what I just described to you before at Yad Mordechai, and it was some tough, sieges and things like that. On the other hand, the Jews don't do well either, because really, here's Jenin, which is the main capital of the southern Galilee. It's one of the triangle over there. And the Jews had a good chance of taking it. The Arabs were so scared, the entire town packed out. The leaders of the Haganah had what they thought was a good plan, and then they made a whole bunch of errors. They did it. They fought like the Egyptians. In other words, they had bad communications, bad intelligence, bad coordination, and the whole thing fell through. And instead of being able to take the town, they waited too long. And the one bomb, the one artillery shell that the Iraqis fired towards the Jews hit the generals and killed them. You understand? And so that messed it up, like we would say today, not bashert. It was majorly very tragic, because if they would take this, then it would be easy to go down here. You don't know the map as well as we ought to. This is not a class and field strategy, but the northern part of Palestine is the Galil and what we call Samaria, Shomron. And here there are three very important Arab cities. And whoever controls them controls the center of Israel, and can easily take the rest of Israel. And in 48, the Jews did not succeed in doing this. That's why you have the West Bank, and that's why it looks the way it does. It was Jenin and Shechem, or Nablus and Tulkarem, and these three towns were very strategically located, still are. And the Haganah had a very good chance, especially in May and early June, of capturing these places, but they blew it through their own incompetence, I'm sorry to say. And as a result, we are paying the price for this town till today. You know what I'm saying? In other words, in the nature of the Israeli borders and the indefensible aspect of what's going on over here. So what you see basically is the Iraqis and the Syrians and Kal V'chomer, the Lebanese, also invade without clarity, and they invade half-heartedly. This was Israel's big break. I didn't say that the Iraqi army comes in like gangbusters with a bunch of tanks and charges all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, which is what they should have done, or go straight to Afula, which is what they plan to do. But they go in, they take this place, and they say, should we advance farther or not? And then they have this kibbutz over here, and they attack it, and they have a siege, and it's a bloody business over there. And sometimes they win, sometimes they don't win, and then they say among themselves, what should we do next? That ain't the way to win a war. And the result is that they encounter tough resistance. For example, the Syrians along here, first attack in the south. And like I'm doing such. When I say the south, here's the Kinneret. You all know, you see that, right? There's the Kinneret, there's Tiberia. They come around over here, and they run into a bunch of these old fancy kibbutzim, Degania and the others, who fight back very tough. So a lot of people get killed on both sides, and the Syrians get spooked. If you go to Degania today, they still have the tank there, where this is how far the Syrian tank got. You know what I'm saying? Now, it was a close call. Each one of these stories is something I could spend an hour on. In the case of Degania, they were falling, and Ben Gurion was going crazy, so we have to do something about this, and he sent Moshe Dayan. It was a young guy, that's how he became famous, with 1 or 2 cannon, the only cannon that they had around, and they brought it up to the hill above Degania and started shelling the Syrians, who go into a panic. Why are you going into a panic over 2 cannon? But they did, right? But they did. And as a result, they pull out of there, but then the Syrians come back and attack elsewhere all the way up here, and they capture Mishmar Yarden, and they do capture it, and the Jews are not able to drive them out of it. This is, again, something we'll talk about a little bit more. It affects totally the politics that's going on right now in terms of relations between Israel and Syria. You follow in the news as I do, the so-called Arab Spring, and how they seem to be in a process of getting rid of Assad, but what's going to go in place of Assad, right? And whoever that is, if there are going to be any kind of discussions, between Syria and Israel, I promise you, you're going to start reading in the newspapers all the recountings of what I just said before. Oh yeah, in 48, the Syrians went and they took this part, and the Jews promised that if they would evacuate, they would make the border such and such, but the Syrians say that the Jews didn't carry out what they promised. We'll have to talk about that. But in the first round, in May and June of 48, it's desultory. The Syrians, the Iraqis, and the others don't really succeed. They're spooked by the difficulties that they have in taking the Israeli strong points, and they refrain from seriously attacking Israeli territory. This is the kibbutzim's finest hour. Because what it boils down to is that in the south and in the northwest, the places they ran into to give them the resistance was the kibbutz. So that's what happened. Some of these places were mauled by the fighting, and if you go there today, they have there's a lot of kibbutzim in the north where they have these memorial plaques and things like this for the people who fell in 48 and movies. But it's true. Now, as you see over here over and over again, the Arabs were not boobs in fighting, but they had unimaginative and hesitant leadership, and that's a fatal flaw in war. And so after 3 weeks, where's all this going? Because this is what happens. Israel's declared a state in the middle of May. You have this fighting that I just described to you happens in the second 2 weeks of May and in the first week of June. Where's it going? You know, what's happening over here? While all this fighting is happening, another political drama is being played out elsewhere, as the United Nations and the great powers, which is America, France, England especially, are pushing for an end to fighting and the peace negotiations. Okay, this is where Bernadette, of course, becomes the face of this. You understand what I'm saying? The minute that Israel became a state on May 15th, 1948, the United Nations immediately said it should be a ceasefire. And the next day they said it should be a ceasefire. And so on and so forth. Now this actually would have been bad for Israel, you get my point? Because it would have frozen forever the advance of the Arab armies into Palestine, and Israel would be about this big, which would be not viable. But nevertheless, the mentality of the United Nations is, as it is today, whenever you have a conflict around the world, first thing we have to end the violence. It's a very politically correct sort of thing to say. You and I say it all the time when we think about climate, crises and violence around the world. First thing we have to do is end the violence. It's part of the political correctness, and I understand where it's coming from. It was counterproductive for Israel, not in 1948, not if our territory is being attacked by the others, and you want to freeze it in place and it'll never go away. Nevertheless, this is what happens. They're pushing for a ceasefire, for peace negotiations, for a truce. All sounds very good. And Count Bernardo, I showed you in a movie last week, lands in Palestine. It takes them a few days. The British, very sneaky, in May 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, for the first week, the British hold back and say, it shouldn't be a ceasefire yet. It's a good idea in general, but hold off, because their side is winning. They want the Arabs to get more territory. After the 21st, by May 20th, 21, the pressure is there that they implement a ceasefire resolution. The United Nations, they send Count Bernadette, who gets there on May 25th, second half of May, and he starts going around from capital to capital, from Cairo to Tel Aviv to Amman to Damascus and stuff. He said, let's go. And he puts very heavy pressure on Israel, on the Jewish authorities. Let's freeze everything as it is. Israel is scared because the geography that they'll be left with is impossible, but it will favor the invaders, in other words. But Bernadotte presses the Jews very heavily to accept the ceasefire and to permit the right of return. Even though the war's still raging, but he's looking at it that from a political correct point of view. Everything should be frozen as is, and of course there should be a peace conference. And meanwhile, before all this happens, let all the Arabs move back to Jaffa and places like that. Can you imagine what would have happened in May, as I just described to you, of 48, if they had not taken out Jaffa in the 10 days prior to May 14th? Tel Aviv would be crunched in the middle. You have 75, 80,000 Arabs in Jaffa. You have the Egyptian army coming up over here, who would be reinforced by an attack on both sides, and Tel Aviv would go down. Now, people do not understand these kinds of realities, but you can be sure that the Jews and the Arabs certainly understood these realities. Moshe Sharet, who was the foreign minister, he was the number 2 in the Israeli government. He is terrified of international sanctions. Israel just became a state after 2,000 years. We can't afford to be condemned by the United Nations. That's his approach. And it's perfectly understandable. We cannot afford for America and the others to cut off the money and cut off these sort of things. Then we are toast. What are we going to do? The only friend Israel has at this hour is Russia. Okay? And the only reason Russia is doing it, and then I'll devote another time to talk about more fully, is because Russia wants to stick it to England. Okay? That's what it is. Believe me, the Russians say, oh, the Arab Legion is advancing over here, taking Jerusalem. That's King Abdullah. He's a client of the British. This is an expand British influence in the Middle East. We want to counter that, and we're therefore winning back the Jews. So the only chance that the Jews have is Russia. That's not great. Bernadotte threatens. Moshe Sharet shouts back. Ben Gurion snorts. But Israel accepts the ceasefire, right? In May. Because they cannot afford, they feel they cannot afford to be on the wrong side of the PR in this. It's a brand new country. It's tough. It's rough. It's cruel. We cannot afford to be looked as anything other than the peacemakers. If they're really pushing us to accept the ceasefire, then we will. And they do with all the problems. With all the problems of being frozen in the positions that I just told you before, that the Arab invaders have occupied a large part of the territory. Fortunately for Israel, as happens over and over again, the Arabs reject it. Okay? That's right. The Arabs do not accept. This was one of 1,000 dumb mistakes that the Arabs made. This was the best chance they'll ever get, right? Because, first of all, the whole Negev and everything is gone to the Jews. Second of all, significant important citizens of the north of the Galil is now under the Syrians, under the Iraqis, under the Jordanians, even under the Lebanese. Freeze it. Right? They're too dumb to get that. And the result is that Arab obtuseness helps Israel. This is a pattern you and I are familiar with. But eventually, even the Arabs give in and do accept the ceasefire. Ben Gurion says very famously, I don't want to accept, but among other things, our forces are exhausted. You understand? Besides everything else, neither side had been fully prepared for a big battle, and our guys are wiped out. And so on June 10th, both sides agreed to a 1-month truce to end on July 10th. Not a permanent ceasefire, a temporary. Count Bernadotte says the idea is, okay, we start with a ceasefire, we get it for a month, and then hopefully we'll negotiate and extend it beyond that and get a peace conference and make a peace treaty. This is the way he's talking about. In light of 60 years of experience that you and I have, this is like la la land, but that's what he thought this is the way it was going to be over there. It'll be hammered out. The Jewish forces were really exhausted. Let me read you a small piece once again to give you an idea of what we're talking about over here. He says that the Grimmest figures, they had this meeting at Ben Gurion's headquarters, and the grimmest figures were given out by the Palmach commanders who had borne the brunt of all this. And half their units were dead, and things like that. And such was the picture which faced the high command at the beginning of the truce. The harsh truth was that the fledgling army was on the point of collapse. The Israelis. It needed arms and equipment. Troops had to be trained. Additional manpower had to be mobilized. Food and ammunition stocks in isolated settlements and above all Yerushalayim had to be replenished. With a month's respite, a month during which, according to truce regulations, neither side would bring anything military advantage whatsoever, but they both cheated, of course. And, the key point is, I wanted to show a particular thing here. They're fighting in pajamas. That's what I wanted to read you. I'll find the right place here. But the guy was saying, my soldiers, the whole units, this is going to sound funny. They don't have clothes. They're out of shoes. Some people are fighting in their underwear. This really happened. Now, in May in Israel, you can do that, but still, any way for an army to operate. And we're down, being ground down, and we can't keep this up. And so because of this and other considerations, they do have this truce for a month. Israel consolidates during the intervening month, bringing in immigrants. Count Bernadotte said that it should be that neither side should get a military advantage during that month. So Israel should not be able to bring in any immigrants. And it was like, yes, you're crazy. The whole point of Israel is to bring in immigrants. We have people in Cyprus and all this sort of thing. And they did it. And Bernadotte didn't like it, but he wasn't going to break the truce over this. And the result is Israel gets a large increase in manpower. The army increases the draft. That makes it more effective. They train relentlessly. Most of this is illegal, and the Israelis do it anyway. The Arabs also cheat, but the Israelis cheat better. This is true. Most importantly, and controversially, a consolidation takes place at the top of the Jewish military effort. Here we get a lot of dirty politics, which I'll want to talk about for a few minutes. Basically, the idea is like this: Ben Gurion be the top commander, El Supremo of everything. In order to have an effective army, this is a fact. In order to have an effective army, effective military, you have to have unity of command. I don't know if you know this or not, but that's like one of the basic rules of the military. Even in the United States of America, we do not at this moment have unity of command. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's no such thing as one person who's in charge of all the armed forces of the United States. Instead, there's something called the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and so on and so forth, in which case it's a committee. And as soon as you have the committee, so this one has to yield on this, and that one has to compromise on the other area. I'm not going to bore you with the military details, but it is what it is. That's because the Army has been around for a couple hundred years, the Navy's been around for a couple hundred years, the Air Force and the Marines have strong lobbies, and neither one is giving in to anybody else's command. This has been the American pattern, and we've paid a price from time to time in wars because of this. We have. Even the United States Army, I remember General Marshall, when he became the Chief of Staff in the beginning of World War II in 1939, he was by no means in charge of the whole Army. The Ordnance Corps was its own independent operation. The guys who make the clothes, I forget what you call them, the Quartermaster Corps, they're in charge of their own operation. Only after Pearl Harbor, when the country was really scared, they made Marshall the head of the whole Army, not the Navy and not the Air Force, okay? Or the Air Force was part of the Army, but not the Navy. And anybody who knows what happened in this country in World War II knows there was a tremendous number of stupid and petty machlokas between the Army and the Navy over how to fight the war, and plenty of lives were lost because of these issues. I'll just give you one notorious example. The Marine Corps, even though belongs to the Navy, but didn't have great relations with the Navy during the Second World War. And so when you had Iwo Jima, the Marine Corps said like this: in order for us to do Iwo Jima right, we need, if I remember correctly, we need 9 days or 10 days of pounding. The Navy has to go there and bomb the place continually, 24/7, with the heavy cannon from the battleships and things like this for 9 or 10 days or whatever, and then we'll go in. The head of the Navy said, you don't tell me what to do, I'll give you 4 days. And this is what happened. And so the result is the Marines had to go in when the place was inadequately bombed, and they lost tons of lives. Now, if you were a parent of this child who was killed, what would you say? So Israel, in its own way, had its own version of this. After all, the Palmach was its own creation back in the early 20s. They're all under the head of the Jewish agency, but they really run their own show. The Haganah ran its own show. The Irgun, I don't have to tell you, ran its own show. The Lehi ran its own show. And there were mistakes, a fair number of mistakes, made in the weeks of May and June in 1948, which caused Jewish defeats or failures of the Jews to gain success due to stupidity and lack of coordination on the Jewish part. It's painful. I told you before, this is something you could read in the 9 days. We could have taken Yerushalayim on a number of occasions. But this group didn't coordinate properly with that group, and this group didn't cooperate and give weapons to that group, and the result is that, there was a failure, as it were. And so, during this truce, Ben Gurion is determined that we're going to get unity of command. Of course, for him means, I guess, I will be the dictator. Right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. But he says somebody has to be. Okay? Now, here it gets very, very tricky. Ben Gurion hates the Palmach autonomy. He hates non-professional officers and generals in command, even though this was a big mistake of his. He hates the lack of a single supreme commander of everything. You can guess who his candidate is for that post. And he hates the Irgun, period. Okay, that's how it goes. He's right on some of these things. You do need a central military command. He's wrong on others. His insistence on his enamorment, I might say, with formal military trappings and formal distance between officers and enlisted men. He says now the officers have to get the uniforms and look like generals, and they have to eat in separate messes from the soldiers, just like any other professional army. There has to be that kind of a distance over there. The officers will refuse to do this in the 48 war. They don't feel comfortable with that. His preference for professional mediocrities, like General Shaltiel or Maclef, over gifted and charismatic non-professionals like Yigal Allon. This is just the facts over here. And above all, he's wrong on grand strategy, Ben Gurion is. He wants Jerusalem first, they want Jerusalem last. Right? You understand? I'll do this one last time. If they would listen to the plan of the generals and concentrate on taking this, what I'm pointing out over here, the north, then the position of legion becomes unsustainable, because then the Jews, if they have up to here, can go down and cut them off from their supplies and wipe out the Arab legion. And General Glubb knows this very well, and he's always ready at a moment's notice to withdraw back to Jordan. We know this today from General Glubb's memoirs, from the memoirs of King Abdullah, if you take the trouble to read them, from the memoirs of Abdullah el-Tel, his second in command or third in command of the Arab Legion, if you take the trouble to read them. We know these things today. And the generals, like Yigal, Yadin, and others, weren't stupid. You understand? And therefore they said, this is what you do first, and that'll be sound, and then we take this, and then we take this, and then we take the whole business. And Ben Gurion said, no, Yerushalayim is in danger, they might fall, there's 100,000 Jews, we can't afford it. And he was responding politically and emotionally, and I understand that fully, and I respect that, but he was wrong. And so the result is the map that we ended up with, the unsatisfactory ultimate map of what we call the Green Line today. Ben Gurion and Yigal Yadin have a big confrontation. Yigal Yadin, as you saw, was the chief of the staff. There's the Yadin with Ben Gurion reviewing the troops. He was 32 years old. He used to scream back at Ben Gurion when Ben Gurion screamed at him, and that's why Ben Gurion respected him. But I told you, it's a very interesting relationship. He says, I know he screams in my face, but he doesn't talk about me behind my back. So I value that. Okay? Anything we have to say to each other, we say honestly up front. And Ben Gurion simply says like this, you have to follow my strategy. And Yigal then says, your strategy is wrong. And he says, I order that you listen to me. No, I'm going to have you court-martialed. Fine, have me court-martialed. I quit, and the whole general staff quits. And that's what happened. It's a Jewish shul meeting. You understand? You don't want me? I'm out of here, I promise you. The whole general staff, the officers and us all resign. But in the best Israeli style, they carry on their duties as if they hadn't resigned. You understand? I made my point. You understand? So Ben Gurion says like this, then I resign. You understand? And it goes back and forth. So what happens is there's a mini crisis among the ministers in the provisional government. They have one meeting after another, which is what Ben Gurion wants. He says, come on, can you back off a little bit? Can you back off a little bit? And so on and so forth. And each one goes, And the result is that the politicians are terrified of the petulance of Ben Gurion, who is the indispensable man. Even his political opponents say that. And I could give you all the details, but like I said before, just go to your local shul meeting and you'll see it yourself. And, Ben Gurion does prevail. After all the petulance, after he's saying I quit for the fourth time and all the rest of it, to kind of give in to him, to Palmach is going to dissolve. He says, we're going to get rid of the Palmach. He didn't like them. Now, there are reasons for that. The reason is purely politics. They were the best soldiers. And if you've been following what I've been talking about the last couple weeks, they're the ones who held the lines against the Arabs and went on the offensive against the Arabs in early 48 up till now. They did do heroic things. You can't take it away. But they belong to the Mapam party, so they're the wrong guys. Welcome to Israel's, what they call the schlissel, the party key. It all depends what party you belong to. And Ben Gurion will carry this to extreme lengths. They had a bitter joke in 1948 in Israel because Ben Gurion's son married an English woman who was a Christian. And the story is that Ben Gurion says to his son, he says, who are you marrying? So-and-so from England. Haimihi Mishalanu? Is she one of us? No, I'm sorry, Father. She's a notrit. She's a Christian. No, but Ha'im Hihi Mishalanu, but she one of us. But she belonged to the Mapai? You understand? So it's this kind of thing that went on back and forth. There's much lasting bitterness. This is inside Israeli politics. Whole careers in the army are shunted aside or retarded, held back because these guys were in the Palmach and they had the wrong association, as opposed to the guys who were in the Ben Gurion team, and they'll be the ones who will be advanced in the army and all the rest of it. For example, the number one guy in the Ben Gurion team is a guy named Moshe Dayan. As you know, he'll be pushed to the top position in the Israeli army a little bit later. Another guy who was on the wrong side, who was in the Palmach, his name Yitzhak Rabin, his career will be pushed aside because he was in the wrong thing for 20 years. That's how it goes in Israel. Anyway, this is the small bitterness. And then comes the big one. And that, of course, is the Irgun and the Altalina. Okay, which I'm sure many people know, because many of you asked me to talk about it. If Mark Rossberg was here, he'd be now ranting and raving over what really happened to the Altalina. Here's Menachem Begin in 48, dissolving the Irgun. You understand what I'm saying? This is their turning out ceremony. He's saying, you've done a good job, and now we're going to join the Tzahal. You follow? And, very, big and very tekes, very much in the ceremonial and all the rest of it. And therefore, I want to be clear over here that Ben Gurion said, you can't have two armies. This is going to be a fascist thing. And Ben Gurion said, fine, we're going to fold into the Israeli army. Don't, be brutal about it. We're willing to join in there. What basically happened was that the Etzel, the Irgun outside of Jerusalem was not part of Israel, so it's a separate unit. There's a separate Irgun unit there. But in the rest of Israel, all the Irgun joins the Israeli army, and they're put as groups. This was the deal that they made. They're put as kfutzot, as groups within a Givati brigade, and the other brigade is part of the Israeli army. So you can tell who are the former Irgun guys, but they're now under the command of the Israeli general staff. That's the way it's supposed to be. Meanwhile, now here comes a tragic story that I'm sure many of you know of, but there's probably, you understand it in pieces. What happened was that, you don't need fiction. History is better than fiction. The Irgun, when it was a underground, or if you prefer a terrorist organization, they had representatives in different countries in Europe. So they had a guy operating in Paris, Shmuel Ariel. He really is a Romanian Yid, and he reinvented himself as Shmuel Ariel, and he understood how to penetrate the highest circles, like Benjamin Franklin of the French establishment. He knows this guy has a girlfriend who has a girlfriend who knows someone else. I mean, that's how it works in there. And the result is that he establishes a relationship with Georges Bidault, who's the French foreign minister. Is a very famous figure. He was number 2 to de Gaulle. And basically, he says, the Irgun's going to come to power, and France should back it. And anyway, we're anti-British, and you're anti-British, so that's something we have in common. And he knows how to play it right. And so Georges Bidault says, even though it's illegal and we're not doing this officially, France is going to help you. We'll give you a ship. Irgun has 900, almost 1,000 guys who want to come and fight. And we'll give you, for free, a ton of ammunition. They give him tanks and, dynamite and rockets, rifles and things like this, all kind of stuff. A tiny little army sort of thing, which Israel needs desperately in the first round in May, as I just described you, in May and 48. Originally it was supposed to land, it was supposed to leave France like May 12th, May 14th, and get to Israel May 20th, May 22. That's a what if. If we can, be sad and dream. If they would land over there in the Irgun in May 23rd, May 24th, would have this huge influence, they could have captured Jerusalem or Ramla or something like that, but it was not meant to be. There's all kind of screw-ups, and the result is the ship does not arrive in Israel until during the truce, like June 20th or something like this. You understand? It is what it is. And so it arrives on June 9th, yeah. Anyway, the point is, what's this all about? Ben Gurion says, was I told about this? And Begin said, yeah, we did tell you. And they did tell Ben Gurion's guys, but he forgot it, or he acted like he forgot it, or something like this. Ben Gurion loathes Menachem Begin for a variety of reasons. The main reason, if you want to be honest, is he fears that he is his only real political rival. You understand? The Israeli public, the politicians, are a bunch of second-raters. That's the fact. Like someone said, they're the chickens that saved Rome, In other words, they're politicians. None of them is really capable of becoming the prime minister and Sarah Bitachon and all the rest of it, and none of them have that kind of charisma. I think, Zalman Aran, even Eliezer Kaplan, they don't even dream of it. You see, David Remez, Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, these are not people who could be number one. And Ben-Gurion knows that as long as that's the situation, he will always be the main guy. He's afraid of him because he has a following, and he particularly has a following with the Sephardim who are now starting to show up in Israel. And so this is very dangerous. It's a toxic brew. Begin does tell Ben-Gurion about the boat. Ben-Gurion, when he hears about it, doesn't believe it. He thinks this is some kind of a trick. He orders the boat to unload its cargo on the beach at Kfar Vitkin, which is north of Tel Aviv, a Mapai kibbutz. They do that, but the Palmach shows up on the scene. They order the Irgunists who are in the beach to disperse. Begin says, wait a minute, before we disperse, we're willing to give you the weapons, but give a chelik for us. Let's split it. You could take 2/3, 3/4, whatever, but we want also because we're going into battle, and we want weapons as well. They say no, and the result is Begin gets very angry. This is Begin's commander, the number one guy in the Irgun, Amichai Paglin. He's the one who conquered Jaffa. And he's there on the beach, and he says, oh, they're trying to do something about us, let's take them out. And Begin said, no, don't do any of that sort of thing. And the result is that Begin gets real angry. And you're going to see this all in the dramatization in 1 minute. Because they have amazing things online. It just, I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, but I found something very close to it. And Begin says, let's get back on the boat, having unloaded some of the cargo, but not the others. There's still plenty of ammunition on board, and go a few miles south to Tel Aviv. And there, we'll do the PR, and everybody will see that we're bringing the weapons not to make a revolution or something like that, and we will prevail. Ben-Gurion says, oh, they're bringing a boat full of ammunition to Tel Aviv. That means this is a coup d'etat, a putsch, as he calls it. And he then said like this, you have to destroy the boat, and Yitzhak Rabin and Yigal Alon, the heads of the Palmach, show up on the scene. The Palmach hate the Irgun. They see them as Nazis. They really do. I mean, you have to understand, this is 1947-48. The different groups hate each other. And this hate will last a whole generation. Today, it's over because everybody died. But at that time, it was real. Anybody who's Israeli here or knows anything about it will know what I'm talking about. And they really did believe, these soldiers do believe, that these guys who are Irgunists really are part of a fascist group that want to make a coup d'etat and establish a fascist state in Israel. And they're going to shoot all the socialists. This is the brainwashing have. The Frum Jews have brainwashing, the non-Frum Jews, the socialists have brainwashing. Everybody has a certain brainwashing in Israel, and that's how it goes. So it's very sad, and it is what it is. So they bomb the boat, and they start shooting, and plenty of people are killed on there. Begin jumps over and swims ashore. It's a whole big business. They were trying to kill him. And I found 2 days ago, only I discovered this 3 days ago, that in 1994, someone in Israel made a docudrama, kind of a movie, sort of documentary, called The Altalina about this. Now, here we are decades later, and so people are a little more objective or calm about this. And it's really cool because you can see the actors who are representing, you won't need me to tell you which one is Ben-Gurion and which one is Begin. Unfortunately, I could only get it, I found it on YouTube, like a little clip here and there, not what I really wanted, but you'll see a few scenes, and you'll notice it's in Hebrew, unfortunately. So those of you who don't understand Hebrew, you'll just have to get the general idea. I was not able to find it with English subtitles. Again, it's a movie that was made in Israel in 1994. I myself didn't know about it. And you'll see, among other things, that they will, the boat will land at Kfar Vitkin on the beach, and the Irgunists will come on there, and Begin will be cheered, and he'll make a shtickle speech over there, and and he'll say, we want some of the weapons. But meanwhile, the Palmach will show up on the heights above, preparing to shoot at them, and then Ben-Gurion will say, let's go to Tel Aviv, and meanwhile, Begin will say, let's go to Tel Aviv, and then Ben-Gurion will say, this is really a plot, and it'll turn into what it turns into. So I hope you'll get I think you will. I hope you'll get something out of the next scene, knowing who the characters are, and Begin is, of course, the guy with the mustache, as you just saw in Begin. Ben-Gurion. I don't believe Begin.
אולי הם מתכוונים להשתמש בנשק הזה כדי להפר הפוגה ולגרור אותנו לקרבות נוספים. אולי הם מתכוונים לשמור על כוח צבאי עצמאי. אולי יש כאן מזימה לפוטש.
Putsch is a coup d'etat.
היום הזה אינני עוד מפקדכם ואתם אינכם עוד חייליי. היום אינכם מצטרפים לשורות חטיבת
So he's telling them to join the Israeli army.
להשבעת החיילים וקבלת הנשק, המסדר יעבור לדום. מסדר זאת.
They're on the beach in Kfar Vitkin.
המפקד. דיין, אין לנו סיכוי. קדימה, קדימה.
It's the Palmach setting up.
לאחר שחתמנו עמו על הסכם לפיו אנו מתגייסים לצבא, הוא זומם לשלוח אותנו אל הקרבות בידיים ריקות, כדי שניפול בידי הערבים. אבל יהודים בארץ ישראל לא יפלו עוד כצאן לטבח.
They're shooting at them.
ננהיג את תל אביב ונמשיך במערכה.
They're going to disarm the people on the beach from weapons.
כמה אנשים היו על האונייה הזאת? אני מקווה שהם לא מבריחים נשק במזוודות שלהם.
צור, פתח את התיק.
Looking for guns in their baggage.
אתה, בוא. אנחנו עולים. רד, באנו להילחם יחד איתכם. מה אתם רוצים מאיתנו? תחת המזוודה, אתם אנשי אצ"ל ואתם מבריחים פה נשק. אנשי אצ"ל.
de Rabbi.
שום דבר. תוך את המזוודה ותן לי לעבור.
C'est pas beau, c'est mal, tu le connais. C'est vrai? Je les ai.
מצידי תחזור לאיפה שבאת, הבנת? לאן? לים? Scheißer nicht. Noch jetzt kommen wir befreit von den Lagern. Ihr wisst, ich muss noch immer machen. Ich bin heute gewesen in Lager.
Oui, il a pris en 41 et le...
You get even if you don't understand the Hebrew, I think you see a little bit of the tension, right? That they're looking for weapons in their baggage, and the other one said, "What do you want our weapons for?" and all this. It's a terrible misunderstanding, and it results in bloodshed, and it becomes a scar in the Israeli political psyche. Begin loses because he swims from the boat, he runs to the Irgun secret radio station, and he makes a wild speech on the radio, crazy speech on the radio, which plays right into the hands of Ben Gurion, because he looks like a nut. And is any of us old enough to remember when Muskie made that speech and blew it in 1972? In politics, it's like that. All you have to do is just maneuver the other guy into going over the top, and then you've marginalized him as a extremist figure, and that certainly was what happened to Begin. It took him, as you know, 3 decades and Ben Gurion to die and all before he could come back over here. But the good news is, the how do they call it, the silver lining of the cloud is, but Begin, as before, says, let's not do a civil war over this. They did a terrible thing, they murdered us, and all the rest of it, but we're in the middle of a war against the Arabs. And so, no civil war. And the result is that the Palmach plays hardball against the Irgun. They kill somebody, they beat them up, but the Irgun does not fight back, and they do get dissolved. And as I told you before, the Palmach is certain that the Irgun are Nazis, and that's why you have all this kind of brutal business. Ben Gurion says, like this, I have no apologies to make. This is a heroic thing we just did. As he said, very famous, HaTotach HaKadosh, the holy cannon we put in our National Museum because it suppressed a coup d'etat and a fascist takeover of the state of Israel. And this was something that Ben Gurion was able to do very successfully the next 30 years, 25 years, whenever we're doing Knesset, and Begin would say, I object to something. If he wanted to press his button, he would say, and why did you try to make a putsch in the Alta Leader? And Begin would say, we didn't try to do that. And he started screaming again, and he would make himself look foolish that way. It's a very interesting human kind of story. It's kind of sad, but as I say before, it's an open wound in Israeli political history. Pretty much, not anymore, because everybody's died, and the Likud is just another party in Israel. They, unfortunately, there are other problems that have pushed this aside. But I can tell you for 30 years and 40 years, this was a big marker in Israel. There was a right and a left. And this is reflected in the bad history that goes back to this area. But Ben-Gurion's the big winner. That's what I want you to understand over here. He does emerge as the guy who crushed the Palmach, who crushed the Irgun, made everything come under him. And now Israel will fight with a unified command, although they will make plenty of mistakes along the way as well, but at least they won't be able to claim that. As the truce comes to an end, Count Bernadotte presses for an extension. He said 4 weeks is not enough. Moreover, he's already worked out a peace conference and a peace treaty. Nobody asked him to, but he thought as a mediator that he should offer interesting suggestions for this. And what he wanted was that Israel should give up the Negev, because you don't have it, and should give up Jerusalem, because you mostly don't have it, as he said it. Jerusalem was originally slated by the United Nations for internationalization. It should be an international city under the direct administration of the United Nations. But Bernadotte says, it's a better idea to give it to Abdullah. You know, it's in the middle of Arab territory. Let's do it that way. In exchange, Israel will get the whole of the Galil, parts of which Israel did not have at that time. And so he said, look, it's even, Stephen, you guys get the Galil, they get the Negev, Abdullah gets Jerusalem, and everybody's happy. Naturally, Israel went ballistic over this whole sort of thing. Most important, though, Bernadotte said, part of the deal is going to be there'll be a peace conference. The Arabs will agree to recognize Israel and make full peace. So I'm offering you something real. I'm sorry to say, but you know I'm right, that if this deal was offered today, there are many in Israel, on certain elements, sectors of the political horizon, who would take the deal. They say, if we get a real peace treaty, genuine, from the Arabs, we will give up half the country or more, you know. So that's what we're talking about at that time. But what made it impossible for Israel is right of return, because this means that the Arabs will outnumber the Jews. Plus, part of the deal was restriction on future immigration. And they said, well, what are we here for in the first place? The whole Israel exists just to bring in the other Jews. This was what it would look like. Under Bernadotte's plan, Israel would be, you know, it's half of the green line. You agree? If we have enough trouble holding on to what we have now, can you imagine how defensible or indefensible Israel would be with these kind of borders? But nevertheless, let me tell you something. This is backed by the United States of America. This is backed by the United Nations. This becomes the official, politically correct, what we say now, the roadmap of what the plans are for all this sort of thing. Fortunately for Israel, again, the Arabs say no. For them, even this is too much. Okay? Even them, this is too much. The only person that accepts is King Abdullah. Gee, I wonder why. By the way, Abdullah would get all of this. I want you to understand. Notice he would get the Negev too. And of course he would accept it. But the others all say no. The other Arab governments, meanwhile, say, well, if we're not taking this, then we're going to have to start the fighting all over again. They are well aware that renewed fighting will not be to their advantage. On the contrary, they know Israel has done better at cheating than they do. They know Israel has done better at building themselves up during the 4 weeks than they have. It's not going to be that they're going to conquer more territory. If anything, they have to worry about the other way around. So the Arabs would like to continue the ceasefire, which would be the smartest thing they would do. But they were victims of their own rhetoric. The Arab street, as we call it today, believes all the propaganda they heard that they had all these gewaltige victories. Isn't that right? If you're living in Cairo or Damascus and you follow the news on the radio or in the newspapers, they destroyed 10 Israeli armies, they wiped out 10 million Jews, the war's going great. As a matter of fact, they say that those who accepted the truce, this is part of the Palestinian propaganda today, those who accepted the truce were traitors to the Arab cause, and they gave the Jews a desperate moment to recover. They themselves were doing bad, but nevertheless, the result is that they feel that they got to continue, reluctantly, they got to renew the fighting. Abdullah is clenching his teeth. He hates it. He's a smart guy. He's frustrated. He's well aware that the status quo is the best he'll ever get. But he cannot defy the consensus. You know how it goes in the Arab world down till today. Nobody can come out and say anything that could be construed as being, at the slightest, anything in favor of Israel. And so he says he's also got to go along here. Israel accepts the Bernadotte's plan for the continuation of the truce, but once again, the Arabs reject it, so Israel gets the best of both worlds, don't they? They're able to say, we wanted to continue, we're peace-loving and all the rest of it, but they said no. And so the war resumes on July the 10th. But immediately, as soon as the war resumes, the United Nations immediately demands a ceasefire, and that means that Israel's up against a clock, which is something that we're all familiar with, which happens in the 56 war, and the 67 war, and all the other wars in there, which is that whenever Israel starts winning, the United Nations is going to close the whole business down. But that's the price of doing business in the Middle East in the 20th century. What can you do? Now, in the South, there's desultory fighting. As I said before, they captured Kfar Darom, but the Egyptian army didn't make any real significant move to go attack Tel Aviv. Quite the opposite. They're more scared than ever before because Israel has reinforced themselves. And so if they go into Tel Aviv, they're afraid they might run into a hornet's nest. In the north, Israel made significant progress. This whole area I'm talking about over here, Nazareth and all the rest of it, they got some decent generals. Finally, Moshe Carmel is not a household word, but Moshe Carmel was the second best general in the Israeli army in 1948. He was also in the wrong party, in the Mapam. Yigal Allon was in the Mapam. Ben Gurion hates these guys, but he says you got to use them because they're good in the generalship. Chaim Laskov, some of us, you probably never heard of him, and Ben Dunkleman, I know Ellie's here somewhere, it's a relative of his, Eli Neuberger. This is a Canadian Jew from a well-to-do family who goes from Toronto to Israel in 1948 to join. He was a major or a lieutenant colonel in the Canadian Army and fought the Germans in D-Day and afterwards, so he really knows his business about the tanks. And that's the type of people they get from the Machal. And they captured Nazareth, which is the main Arab territory in the north, as we all know. And the result is that the Jews do take over a fair amount of territory, but here's the problem, and it's a huge problem. And that is the Galilee Arabs, including many Druze and Christians, do not leave. Now, that means the old thing is over. In April and in May, and perhaps in early June, when the Jews came somewhere, the Arabs were scared and ran away. Jenin, I told you before, was a real tragedy because the whole town was empty. When the Jews looked like they might capture Jerusalem, I can tell you 3/4 of the Arabs flee Jerusalem. In the north, it doesn't happen like that. The Arabs that are taken over by the Jews, including many Christian villages, they just stay there. So what do? Then it becomes tricky. Interesting implications. In the center, Ben Gurion wants them all to leave. But he can't say to himself, we're going to be brutal and throw them out. Can't do that either. And so what he really wants is, like the Gemara says, he says, I want you to do it, and then I'll say, I didn't tell you to do it. But the generals say, we're not going to do it if you don't tell us to do it. We're going to get in trouble for you. And between all this sort of thing, Israel is conflicted and has no policy towards the Arabs, and the result is that you have a uneven picture. In some places, local commanders brutally drive the Arabs out like they did back in April and May. In other places, they do the exact opposite, leave everybody totally alone and let people come back. And so Israel ends up with this Arab situation that we're familiar with, which is they just offended everybody and didn't achieve one way or the other. Either you let everybody in, back, or else you throw everybody out. But to do 50-50 or 70-30 or something like this just means you get everybody angry, and that is what will happen. Same thing happens in the middle. Ben Gurion wanted to say, this time we're going to capture Jerusalem, we're going to take Latrun. They do not do it. They get defeated once again by the Legion in a bunch of miscalculations and incompetent moves, I'm sorry to say. But one of the things they do is they capture Ramla and Lud, which is on the way to Jerusalem. They capture it. They think, it's going to be a huge fight. The Arab Legion isn't even there because Abdullah realizes if he tangles with the whole Israeli army, he'll get defeated. He doesn't have a big army. He has 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 men, 6,000 men. They can't afford large casualties. They already had some casualties fighting the Jews back in May and early June. If they go and mess with them again, who knows what will happen? Their ammunition is low. I told you, the Jews did a much better job of cheating and stealing and bringing in ammunition during the truce. General Glub is scared out of his mind. And so the most he can do is hold on to what they have and hold on to the old city of Jerusalem. To go near Tel Aviv, which is where Lud and Ramla is, he'll get creamed. And so they didn't even try to do so. And so the Haganah does capture Lud and Ramla, but it's a town with 35,000, 70,000 Arabs altogether, and what do you do with them? And it's very famous. Yigal Allon, and especially Yitzhak Rabin, who's 26 years old, goes to Ben Gurion and says, what do I do with all these people? And Ben Gurion's really trying to say, you know what to do. And no, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. You know what to do. No, this really happens. I'm not being funny over here. I'm being funny, but I'm not making it up. And he, let me tell you something. Rabin, who had a big mouth, wrote this in his memoirs. This was censored, and then it was sneaked out to the New York Times, and they published it. And you can read it yourself if you look at Yitzhak Rabin's memoirs. And he says, I went to Ben Gurion. I said, what should I do with them? And Ben Gurion went like this. Like that. Do you want me to evacuate them? Yeah, this is what it is. So sometimes a very decisive person, sometimes the opposite. It's a huge mess. It gets even worse because it's very complicated, but they went into Ramla, and then the Arabs surrendered, and then some Arab Legion guys by accident drove in there, and then the Arabs thought, oh, they're coming to rescue us, and they start shooting at the Jews, and the Jews go ballistic, and they say, you surrender, now you're shooting back at us, and they start shooting civilians and blowing places up, and it's like a shtickle massacre over there, but then they stop it, and the end of the story is that the Israeli army says to the Arabs in Ramla and Lud, get out of here, and they force them all out. The Arab Legion is only 20 miles away, which is true. Go to Abdullah, and they force them all. It's a tough story, but they force them all to go in there. There's only a few hundred of them left in Lud and Ramla, if you can keep them out, and that helps as far as the road to Jerusalem is concerned. Right? These are the guys who had the actual responsibility of throwing everybody out, and Ben Gurion is like I'm saying, do what you need to do, and the result is that Israel cannot afford too many incidents like I just described. You see, if this becomes a pattern, it's already too late. In April and May, you could do it. In July and August, you can't do it anymore. This is just the reality of it. And the result is that the Arab panic and flight is not going to repeat itself. This is a factor of supreme importance in the future, as we know, because it means that Israel will not be able to take over a state. Let me jump ahead and just tell you right now, if you go by the maps, Israel, as 1948 and 49 progress, will get stronger and stronger, and then by the time it's over, we'll easily be able to take over the West Bank, if that's what they wish to do. It's not what Ben Gurion wants to do. And the reason they want to do it is there are too many Arabs. So what I'm talking about are not little incidents and cute, funny things about people making gestures with their hands. These are matters of supreme political importance, of high policy, and they govern what will happen to Israel in the long run. As I said before, the Haganah tries to capture Jerusalem again. This guy had a whole bunch of failures. Ben Gurion liked him because he had been a captain in the French Foreign Legion, so therefore he's a professional soldier. He had this, aura about him, but he was very incompetent. He's replaced with this guy, but by the time he's replaced with Moshe Dayan, the fighting is going to be over, as you'll see soon. So in general, what happens is, for 10 days there's fighting, and then the United Nations make him stop. And that's what it was. Israel wanted to go more, obviously, but that's all you can do. For 10 days there's fighting, and then they have to stop. It's basically disappointing. It's a failure of grand strategy, and it's basically a failure of Ben Gurion. That's the simple fact. He had greatness, and he also had mess-ups. And there'll be no more fighting in Jerusalem. In fact, let me tell you, when this happens, that's July 20th, right? July 10th to July 20th. When July 20th happens, then Abdullah and Jordan say like this, we are not making this mistake again. We are not going to break a truce. A ceasefire. We're going to keep peace. Not because he likes Israel, but because he understands that anything else will mean that Israel will take more territory. And so, although there will be other fighting in September, October, November, December, and all this of 1948 and so forth, Jordan will never participate in this. And that's because they're smart. I'm sorry that he was smart this way, but he was very smart. And he realized that, the whole thing is, what do you end up with at the end of the day? We've got the maximum we can get. I'm never going to get Tel Aviv. I'm not fooling myself. I'm never going to be able to conquer Haifa and things like this. I got a nice piece over here. What about the old city? This is just the price we'll have to live with it. The Jews will have the new city, The Jews will have to live in the new city, but everything else we'll have. You understand? So Abdullah was very clever in this particular regard. The other Arab states will not be quite so clever, but it will be very, very tricky. They'll be conflicted of whether to continue the fighting or not continue the fighting. But as the year progresses, they are getting wiser, and they realize the more fighting happens doesn't necessarily come out as a plus for the Arabs. It comes out more for a plus for the Jews. And it's for that reason that they'll be interested in eventually concluding the fighting and getting the best kind of ceasefire and armistice deal they can to hurt Israel. And they do a very good job of it, I'm sorry to say. Because, frankly, I think you'll understand after what I said tonight, the old borders are kind of indefensible. I understand Israel has a powerful armament and they have an A-bomb. I know that also. But from a military point of view, these were crazy borders. It's not like anybody drew them up with any kind of a plan. They happened. Why didn't they take Jenin? They just didn't take Jenin. Why did they take Akko? They took Akko. Why did Nazareth fall? Nazareth happened to fall. The other, what about Tulkarem? That they failed to take. In other words, there was no plan in it. It's just the happenstance of 1948. But if you want to understand the core, and I repeat, the core of the Arab-Israeli problem down till today, don't go by what you read in the newspapers, all these sort of superficial things. My advice to you is, if you have the stomach for it, to study very closely the details of what happens in 1948 and early 49, and understand the political as well as the military struggle, and understand the pressures that Israel was under, and you see the right moves that they make, and you see the wrong moves that they made. But unfortunately, the wrong moves are with us today. The Gaza Strip is what it is. It ain't going away. And it's 1 million, and tomorrow it'll be 2 million, it'll be 3 million. And the West Bank is what it is. It ain't going away, no matter what anybody wants. And what's sad is that I think you see the window of opportunity, so to speak, from a strictly Zionist point of view in our history, boils down to April, May, early June of 1948. I mean, that's what it seems to be. I'm a little bit oversimplifying, but not a lot. So it is what it is, and on that note, I conclude tonight. We'll continue next time.